Hello everyone, welcome back to Chronicle IS Academy. My name is Saloni Nankyoliar and I welcome you to the fourth lecture of our policy analysis series, where each week we're picking up one topic of public policy and covering it in detail. So the topic for today's discussion is understanding trade war. Trade war is a term that's in news these days. It's everywhere. We're all hearing about it. So in this video, we'll try to understand what a trade war is, when did all this originate, how is it impacting India, and what is a recommendation that we have for India wherein it's not heavily negatively impacted from the situation, from this trade war situation. Let's get started. So, what is a trade war? Trade war is not a real military war. Trade war, as the name suggests, it's an economic situation wherein one country imposes economic sanctions, trade barriers on the other country, and the other country in retaliation imposes further sanctions and trade barriers on the first country. So it's a war-like situation, an economic war-like situation where these sanctions are being imposed by countries on one another. And this can happen due to multiple reasons. There are different reasons that are cited for this. We'll dive into those as well. Why did all this start and when did all this start? So this originated, so it started in the US in 2018 in the Donald Trump regime, and this happened first against China. So US started this trade war against China in 2018, citing unfair trade practices. So there are many reasons that have been cited by the US government for this trade war, and one of them is the high trade deficit that the US was facing with China. So there was a trade imbalance in the US-China trade. US was always in deficit and China was always in surplus, which means that US was importing a lot of products from China, but it was not exporting that much. So the balance sheets of US, they were negatively impacted. That was one reason. The second reason was forced tech transfers. So forced tech transfer or technology transfer is a situation wherein these foreign companies, in this case the companies from the US, they were forced to transfer their technology, their intellectual property, and their secret technology basically to the local companies of China, just to gain access to the Chinese market. So this was a prerequisite, a condition that had been set up by the Chinese government, that if you want to enter our markets, there are some investments that you will have to make into our local companies. You will have to make these technology transfers. You will have to share your technology, your intellectual property with us. So when all these things started happening, US kind of started this whole war-like situation where it imposed heavy sanctions on China. So yeah, some key actions that were taken by the US was that there were high tariffs that were imposed on the Chinese goods. There were restrictions on key imports on steel, aluminium, and technology. So there were heavy tariffs that had been imposed on steel, on aluminium, and on technology. Then it in turn resulted in trade disputes with EU, Canada, Mexico, and India. Because we're talking about a global economy here. If two countries are, not just any two countries, two really high resource-rich and economically, politically powerful countries, when they indulge in this kind of a trade war situation, it negatively impacts the entire global economy. So every country is impacted by this. So that is what happened in this situation also, that there were trade disputes with EU, Canada, Mexico, and India as well. So yeah, what are the impacts of trade war on the global economy? They're definitely not good. This causes a lot of disruption in the global economy. The global supply chain is disrupted because if a country that's resource rich, that has a lot of minerals, a lot of resources, it's good at something, if you impose sanctions on that country, it will not be able to export those goods in that capacity. And this in turn is definitely going to disrupt the global supply chain that we have in the world economy. So that's what happened. It disrupted the global supply chain. It resulted in a slowdown in the global trade growth. So the WTO estimated that this US-China trade war resulted in a 0.4 to 0.6% slowdown in the global GDP. So definitely not a good thing for the world economy. It results in the rise of protectionism. So protectionism is a situation wherein a government, in order to protect its local companies, it imposes huge tariff barriers and economic sanctions on foreign companies so that it can protect its own domestic countries from the competition that's coming from outside. So all this trade war basically increases the protectionism in these local companies, in the local countries, and it's not a very good thing because it sometimes is required, but in appropriate amounts. If you increase the protectionism, the domestic companies will not be able to grow a lot because they'll not be competing with the market, and they'll not be producing competitive goods. And then you're also restricting the choice that the consumers will have. They'll be forced to buy the products that have been made in the country itself because they are not competitive with the foreign goods. The foreign goods are a lot more expensive than what the domestic companies are offering here. So it negatively increases protectionism when the trade war is happening, and it shifts the global trade alliances. So nations reduce their dependence on US and China, because US and China, they were imposing these sanctions on each other. So countries started looking for alternative hubs, for alternating manufacturing hubs or alternate IT hubs, so that they don't really have to be dependent on these two countries itself. So there were some specific impacts on countries. China obviously faced a decline in exports to the US, and it shifted towards Asia, EU and Africa because of the heavy sanctions that had been imposed by the US on China. It started looking for alternative markets, and it moved towards Asia, European Union, Africa, these countries. European Union also faced economic uncertainty and higher industrial costs, and the developing countries were also affected by it because of the disruption in the global supply chain, in the disruption in the raw material availability. So every country in the world economy was affected and is being affected by the trade war that's currently ongoing. Okay, let's look at some of the top trading partners for India. So there are some major countries that we do a lot of trade with, and let's take a look at those. So US is the largest trading partner for India, and this is a surplus trade that we have. We will cover this in the next slide also. So in the US-India trade, India is in surplus and US is in deficit. We are importing less, and we are exporting more products to the US. So we are exporting our IT goods, our pharmaceuticals, our technology to the United States. So it's the largest trading partner, and this is a surplus trading partner. Then we have China. China is our second largest trading partner, but this has the largest deficit. So China is a country that we import the maximum number of products from. So we import electronics, we import machinery, we import critical raw materials from China, and this India-China trade, it has the largest deficit impact on India. So then we have UAE. This is another important trading partner for India, and it's a major trading partner. So, major energy trading partner. We import crude oil, we import petrochemicals from UAE, and gold and jewelry. So we import all sorts of energy resources from the UAE. And similarly, we do same thing with Saudi Arabia also. So Saudi Arabia is also an important destination for our energy imports, where we're importing crude oil and petrochemicals from Saudi Arabia as well. And we are importing a lot of things from the European Union, like automobiles, like manufacturing, agri-food products. We're importing these things from Germany, Netherlands, France. So we're importing a lot of things from the European Union also. And in order not to be negatively impacted by the trade war, what should India be doing? India should be reducing its dependence on the foreign markets. Like, we cannot be a closed economy. This does not mean that we're not going to do trade with other countries, but we need to reduce our dependence on for critical minerals or resources on other countries, and move more towards self-reliance and the Atmanirbhar Bharat vision that the government has. So we need to reduce our dependence. We need to enhance our bilateral agreements. We need to do free trade agreements with EU, UK, Australia. We need to leverage our multilateral platforms like WTO, BRICS, Quad, and IPEF, and we need to strengthen our manufacturing, expand our MSMEs, boost technology and pharma. So technology, the IT sector, the pharmaceutical sector are some strong sectors that India has, and these are some sectors that we do a lot of export in. So we need to strengthen these sectors in order to benefit more in our trade balances. Okay. So what is the impact that this trade war has on India and the overall trade balance and the sectoral effects? So in the 2023 and 24, in India's overall trade balance, India was in a trade deficit of $250 billion. So this is our total export, this is our total import, and we have a trade deficit with the world economy right now, which means we are importing more and we are exporting less products. So some top exported commodities that we have is the refined oil, petroleum products. So we import a lot of crude oil, we refine it, and then we export the petroleum products or the refined oil. We export a lot of pharmaceuticals like vaccines, generic medicine. We saw this even during the times of COVID, when India imported a lot of vaccines outside, so a lot of pharmaceutical products. We have our IT services and software sector that's very robust. We outsource a lot of technology, a lot of IT resources outside. Textiles and garments is a top exported commodity for India, and gems and jewelry again is a top exported commodity. Then some top imported commodities are crude oil and petroleum. India is the third largest oil importer. So we have to import a lot of crude oil and petroleum from UAE, from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations. And we import a lot of gold and precious metals. So we import a lot of gold from UAE, from Africa, a lot of precious metals from outside. Electronics like mobile semiconductors, chips from China and other countries, machinery and heavy equipment, fertilizers and chemicals. So these are some top imported commodities for India. And this is a table just to show you the countries and the trade situation that we have with them, whether we are in deficit or we are in surplus. So as I mentioned, US, this is our number one trading partner, but this is a surplus trading partner. So we have a surplus of $27 billion with the US, wherein India is benefiting from this trade, US not that much. Then China is the second largest trading partner for India, but India has the largest deficit with China. So there's a deficit of close to 100 billion, which is the largest trade deficit for India right now. Then we have UAE. UAE, again, we have a deficit of $30 billion, mainly due to the oil imports that we have to make from the UAE. With European Union, we have a slight surplus of $3 billion. And with Saudi Arabia, again, we have a deficit due to the energy imports. So India is heavily reliant on the UAE, on Saudi and other Gulf countries for crude oil, for its energy imports, energy demands. Okay. So what is the impact of the US tariffs on India? It's definitely not good. These tariffs are negatively impacting the trade situation that we have with the US. And so these tariffs, some tariffs that have been imposed are like 25% tariff has been imposed on steel, 10% tariff has been imposed on aluminium, and India has lost its GSP. This is a very important thing, the generalized system of preferences. This was a situation. So GSP is a preferential trade agreement or a situation wherein a developing country, a developing nation benefits from its trade with a developed nation. So the developed nation does not impose any tariffs, any economic, high tariffs or duties on the developing nation, just and gives it access to its market. And this is a non-reciprocal thing. So the developing country benefits from it, but the developed country does not benefit from this thing. It is only giving free access to its market, to the developing nation, so that it can grow. It can, grow and expand its trade in the different sectors in the developed countries. So India enjoyed this GSP status up until 2019, but then in the Donald Trump regime, this was taken away from India, and then India was again put back into the ordinary category of tariffs and sanctions that were being imposed on all the other countries also, and it lost its GSP status. So this is one thing that happened. Then definitely there was a retaliation by India. So India imposed higher tariffs on 28 US goods, including almonds, walnuts, apples. So this affected the US farmers. So US imposed sanctions or took away the GSP status from India. India in retaliation imposed higher tariffs on some of the US products. There were non-tariff barriers that were imposed by the US. So not only tariffs, there are also non-tariff barriers, like non-tariff barriers would be your sanitary, phytosanitary measures, and also like higher scrutiny on Indian pharmaceutical exports, restrictions on H-1B visas affecting India's IT professionals. So they're not directly, imposing economic sanctions or increasing the duties or imposing higher duties on Indian products, but we are following the intangible route, like the non-tariff barriers. We're imposing more restrictions on more quality checks on the imports that India is making and on the exports that India is making, and then this in turn negatively impacts India's trade sheet. And post-2021 developments, the tariffs on steel and aluminium remain, but India is negotiating their removal. So India is doing very good diplomatically. We are holding good diplomatic trade talks with the US so that we can remove these trade barriers, we can remove these sanctions, and we can move towards reinstating our GSP status or having preferable trade conditions between countries. So this is something that India is doing. Now, what is the historical context? Like, have these trade sanctions being made on India before, or was this the first time? This was not the first time. These sanctions were imposed on India first time during the Pokhran test in 1998. So US and some other countries, other Western countries, they imposed economic sanctions on India in retaliation of India's nuclear program. So this happened during the Pokhran test of 1998. And even today, as we mentioned, that there are trade restrictions by the US. There is tariff on Indian steel, on aluminum exports. So even today, there are trade sanctions that are happening. Historically also, they have been happening. Today also, they are happening. So, yeah. What is India's response? Now, India, most importantly, is following good diplomatic talks, is holding good diplomatic talks, relationships with the US embassies, with the US government, so that these sanctions can be moved out of the picture and we can have a preferable trade situation with the US. So that's happening. We're following trade diplomacy. We're making use of WTO mechanisms. We are making use of the WTO settlement body. We're challenging these sanctions in WTO so that it intervenes and it negotiates and creates a preferable situation for both of us. We are diversifying our export market. Most importantly, we're reducing our dependence on one market, on just the US market. We are diversifying our markets. We're tapping into potential resource-rich countries. We're making better relations with them, better bilateral relations with them, and we're diversifying our trade market. And in the long-term strategy, we are boosting our domestic manufacturing. So we're focusing on making India self-reliant, on making India Atmanirbhar in as many things as we can. Definitely will not close all the trade relations from every country outside, but we'll make ourselves self-dependent and self-reliant so that we are not always critically impacted when these situations come into picture. There are trade agreements. We are strengthening our FTAs with EU, UK, Australia to offset losses in the US market. So we are diversifying our markets. We're moving towards other potential rich markets. And we're doing our tech and green exports. So we are expanding our exports in AI, semiconductors, electronic vehicles, and renewable energy, because India is very good in pharmaceuticals. India is very good in the IT sector. It's very good in all things related to technology. So we are strengthening that. We are making it more robust so that we can, make up for the losses that we might have to face due to the trade war. And lastly, what is the road ahead for India? So what are some policy recommendations that we have for India so that India can save itself from this negative picture, negative trade war picture in the global scenario? We can follow sustainable trade practices. We can focus on green energy exports, carbon-friendly policies, because many countries nowadays have started imposing carbon tax, and they are imposing more restrictions on industries, on products that are not environment friendly. So we can move towards carbon-friendly policies so that we create environment-friendly products and save ourselves from these kind of sanctions. We can boost our digital trade. With digital being everywhere, with the IT sector being everywhere, we can boost our digital trade. We can increase our multilateral and bilateral pacts. We can focus more on RCEP, Quad and IPEF. So we can focus on alternative markets. We can focus on Asia. We can focus on Africa. We can focus on the Indo-Pacific zone. So we can do all those things. We can make ourselves self-reliant and competitive. So we can focus on our domestic countries. We can strengthen them. We can strengthen our MSMEs, our self-help groups, so that they're self-reliant and they're producing more and we're importing less. And in short-term measures, we can address the immediate trade disputes with the US diplomatically. We're already doing it, and we can strengthen that more. We can use the WTO mechanisms to challenge unfair tariffs. This WTO, we can make use of the WTO settlement body. We can raise our concerns and in turn, bring this up in the international, on the international platform. So with the US trade war, it has definitely reshaped the global trade practices, and India is both challenged and benefited. Challenged in a way that there were sanctions that have been imposed on India, on Indian steel, on Indian aluminum, and benefited in a way that due to the sanctions being imposed on the US, India has India has emerged as an alternative manufacturing hub. So it has both been challenged and benefited. So India must focus on its economic diplomacy, trade diversification, manufacturing growth to secure its position in the global economy. Yeah, so that was all for today's video. We understood what a trade war is, when did it originate, how is it impacting India, what are some top trading partners for India, and what are some policy recommendations that we have for India so that it can save itself from the negative impacts of a trade war. So until we meet the next time, please keep studying and keep analyzing. Thank you.